Welcome. My name's Simon Goddard. I'm from Fresh Expressions. I lead on resourcing within Fresh Expressions, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this lunchtime conversation, this chat with Mike Moynagh. I am really pleased that you're watching this video or listening to this recording, or if you're here live, I'm really pleased for that too. And however you're watching or listening, I invite you to interact with us, write something in the comments. And if you are watching or listening to us live, we may be able to interact with those comments during our conversation today. Mike, we know each other quite well. You're the author of the Godsend book that is a key part of the resources that we offer to those starting new Christian communities. But we're here today to talk about your new book, Giving the Church. So as we begin that conversation, it'd be really good for you just to introduce yourself. What puts you in the position to be able to write what you're writing today? Tell us a little bit about your history and how you've come to write this book.
Well, I could answer that. My main qualification for writing this book is that years ago I wrote a PhD on a history of the Fiji sugar industry, but I think that might put off all your listeners and viewers. But over the years, long years since then, I've become ordained. I'm an ordained minister in the Church of England, and I've been involved with Fresh Expressions of Church, new types of Christian community, for the last 25 years or so. I've written all sorts of books about the subject. Some are quite popular books. 2 or 3 are more academic books. I'm really interested in the theology of these new Christian communities, but I'm equally interested in the methodology. How do they work? So I've been involved with that. I've been involved in advocating for these communities, consulting and coaching individuals involved. And I've been involved with that for the last 20, 25 years.
Great. So
I should say, perhaps I should add, just to make myself look a little bit more credible than I probably really am, that I have a base at Wycliffe Hall in Oxford, and I'm associated with them. So that gives me a tiny smidget of academic credibility, I think.
I think, Mike, you're for those that know you, you're able to write quite thick tomes academically, and yet I think what you're also able to do is to take some of that academic thinking, that deep thinking that you do, and create and communicate it in ways that are simple enough for people like me to understand. So that's a real knack that you have. So as we talk about this particular book, Giving the Church, just tell us why you wrote it.
Well, I wrote it, Simon, because if you were to do a course on the doctrine of the church, you'd probably be given as your first book to read a book by a Roman Catholic, Avery Dulles. And what he does is to set out 6 models of the church as an institution, church as community, the church as a herald proclaiming the gospel, the church as a sacrament, and so on. And as I thought about those 6 models, one of the things that wasn't there is the church as a gift. And if you read the literature about church, giving is assumed, generosity is assumed, it's assumed that the church is a gift from God, that it should be a gift to the world. But no one's really explored that as a theme in its own right. And I find that really interesting because, our whole theology is based on grace and on Christ as a gift. And so if Jesus is a gift, his body should also be a gift. And so actually unpacking that and seeing what it means is really interesting, I think. And so that's what I wanted to do and see where it took me. And so my kind of overarching question in the book is, could the church as a gift be a 7th model of church to put alongside Dulles' other 6?
Okay, and so as you wrote this book, what struck you most powerfully, do you think, as you put the book together? And you got that initial idea of the church as a gift.
Yeah.
But what was striking you as you wrote the book?
I found it really powerful as a way of revisiting some of the traditional themes in ecclesiology, doctrine of the church, themes about what is the church, themes about the four marks of the church, about inclusion and exclusion, visible, invisible church. I found that really helpful, that it gave new insights into that. But in particular, what I found was that it seemed to give us a new language and a new way of thinking about the great task that we have today, which is how do we multiply new Christian communities? How do we do church planting, or whatever language you want to use? And in my denomination, Church of England, they've got a target of 10,000 new worshipping communities, and other denominations have equivalent targets. And this question of starting new Christian communities, it shot up the agenda because there's a great fear, not an unreasonable fear, that the church is on its last legs. And unless we start these new communities with new people, the church is going to disappear. The problem is that in the pews, and for most of us, it's not very motivational to say, go and start new worshipping communities, because if you don't, we're all going to be dead. For some people, that's a spur. But for many of us sitting in the pews, oh gosh, this is just too big a problem. However, if we talk about the church as a gift, and God calls us to give the heart of the church's life, which is communal life with Jesus, God calls us to give that gift to others. And when we do that, we're being like God in God's self. We're being generous in the way that, or an echo of how God is generous. Then that, I think, is much more motivational. It's very simple. You don't have to be a very sophisticated Christian to get this is what it's about. It's about being kind, being generous, being loving. So it's a really simple idea, but it's actually quite heartwarming. Isn't this what we're called to do? To be generous to the world in the way that God is generous to us. And of course, there are lots and lots of ways we can be generous. We can share our resources. We can, put ourselves on display through Christian art and music and so on. So there are lots of ways of being generous. We can join campaigns for social justice and environmental justice and so on. But I want to say that all that is true. But the prime way in which we can be generous is to give the heart of our life. Because when, the heart of your life is the most precious thing you can give. And precious gifts are reserved for precious people. So when we give to the world, or offer to the world, the heart of our life, which is communal life with Jesus, when we do that, we make a hugely important statement about how precious other people are to us. And so, and as I say in the book, there's no other organization in the world which offers communal life with Jesus. Only the church can do that. And so it's a hugely important thing to do, and we need to do it sensitively and carefully. It's a great calling. And of course, when you offer the church's life in the form of new Christian communities, and you multiply these new communities, you then multiply all the other kinds of giving that the church can do. You multiply volunteering, you multiply financial giving, you multiply joining into social justice and all the rest. So if you multiply the heart of the church's life, you're just going to accelerate and increase abundantly the generosity of the church, which in turn is the generosity of God. So for me, this is a really exciting theme. And I think in a church like my church, which is quite driven by managerial objectives, how many new communities are you going to plant? You won't get the money if you don't. It's all quite growth driven. And John Milbank makes the point, growth is the ideology of capitalism. It's all quite disheartening. And so something like giving, and there are other theologies you could use that would be heartwarming, but something like giving can be a heartwarming theology to underpin what we're doing.
Mike, that's great. And I've just got another question you may have already touched on as you talk about the different types of generosity. But I'm just thinking, we're talking a couple of years after COVID, and I know in some parts of the church, things feel a bit more difficult. There's a sense in which resources are limited, and so I find the idea of generosity motivating and inspiring. But there may be some people who are thinking, what have we got to give? So I guess the question is generosity always a good thing? Are we always in a position to be generous, or is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Are there times when we shouldn't be generous? Do you hear what I'm saying?
Well, I think that there's several parts to that question. I think there are some congregations that are just too bruised, battered, and disheartened to really be expected to give very much. They might be able to give a tiny bit, but that capacity to give has been really wounded. And it's like individuals, isn't it? If you're a wounded person, your capacity to be generous to others is seriously impaired. And I think we just need to recognize that. And we need to love those congregations to bits, because the only way to heal wounded, disheartened, fragile congregations is just to love them. You're not going to, exhortation won't do it. But I don't think that's universal across the church. And I'm struck, I remember hearing ages ago about a tiny little Methodist church that was, quite disheartened, and the new minister got them together, about 15 of them, and just said, they read Acts chapter 2 about the marks of the church, and they had a discussion, is this what we're like? And they said, no, we're bored. We've heard the same sermon for 50 years of our lives, And they had all the marks of being a disheartened, dispirited church. But someone said, over there, they set themselves up cafe style. So why don't we do that? Why don't we just meet around tables with coffee and see what happens? And they grew from 15 to 25 people. So what I'm saying is that even the most dispirited church and congregation may be surprised by, if they do something a little bit different, they can too become a gift. And of course, within a group of 15 people who are dispirited, there may be one person or two people who've got a tiny bit of energy. And it's amazing what one or two people can do. So, I think, we are in a difficult position, absolutely, post-COVID. I sometimes joke with people, every morning I wake up in hope and go to bed in despair. But I do think that within the difficult situation we find ourselves, that there are lots of potential sparks, but it's fanning the flames. And a theology of generosity could be just one of the fans that helps bring alive the flames that are lying dormant.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And just sort of related to that, and when we think about the church as a gift, giving the church, that's what we're talking about. And I think you've been quite precise. Actually, what we're offering as a gift is communal life with Jesus. So it's not the church per se, it's what's at the heart of church, which is this communal life with Jesus. But is the church a gift that anyone would want to receive? I sort of ask that slightly tongue-in-cheek, but you hear the question, Is this church that we've got, is it something that people want to receive?
Well, I found it really interesting writing this book, because when I did my first draft, I knew this was an important question. I thought, well, halfway through the introduction, I'll deal with it. But when I gave it to one or two people to read, I found that they were actually struggling with the book after paragraph 4. That if I hadn't addressed this question in paragraph 4, they really weren't interested. And what I found was, in my sample of about 6 people, was that the evangelicals were much less likely to ask this question than people who came from other traditions. And they wouldn't necessarily call themselves liberals, but people at that sort of wing of the church were much more likely to be very self-critical of the church and to be aware of its limitations. And so I think we do have to take seriously that the church is bad news for many people. You've got to think of the sex abuses, the cover-ups. You've just got to go through history and think of the various wars and atrocities that the church has been involved with. And you don't have to go far back in history either to find that around the world. There is a lot that the church can be ashamed of and needs to repent of. And as I've wrestled with this, I think, clearly one response to the bad news of the church is for the church to simply be honest about that, to admit it, to repent, and also to say, if you feel ashamed, we can stand alongside you because we feel ashamed. If you feel that you have done wrong, we can stand alongside you because we've done wrong. If you feel that that really you're not achieving very much, that your life is under threat in terms of meaning of your life, well, we can stand alongside you because we feel ourselves to be a bit meaningless and under threat. And so admitting our own failures can help us to stand along other people who have that sense of failure. But going beyond that, as I wrote the book, I kept thinking to myself, the antidote to all that we've done wrong is to be generous. If we want to be a church that's good news, we just need to give to other people. I mean, that's the good news. Now, of course, you need to give in a good way, and we could talk about good and bad giving. But being generous is the antidote to all the stuff that makes the church unattractive to people. If we want to be a nice church, an attractive church, we need to be a generous, giving church.
That's great, Mike. I got so many questions having read bits of the book. What I hear you touching on a bit in the second part. Maybe you can just give us an overview of the two parts of the book. Do you want to do that, and then I'll ask you a question from that touches on what you were just saying, but from the second part of the book.
So the first part of the book really deals with some of the big doctrinal themes in the doctrine of the church. So I just set up the notion of the church as a gift and explain why that makes sense. I hope others agree with me. And then I'm saying, okay, if you open up the gift, what does it look like? What is the nature of the church? And then I've said, let's look at the 4 marks of the church. How does that look different, those marks, the marks of, one holy, Catholic and apostolic? How do those 4 marks look different if we look at them through the lens of generosity? Likewise, a great, visible, invisible church. There are a number of different ways of framing that. And again, I've said, how does each way of framing that look different if we approach it through the eyes of giving? And then the really important question for today, what about the church being inclusive as opposed to being exclusive? Again, I've wanted to approach that through the lens of generosity, and how does that make a difference? And then in the second half of the book, I wanted to talk about what healthy giving looks like, because, in some languages, not everyone knows this, but in some languages, gift and poison come from the same source. And which is really interesting. And of course, a lot of giving is manipulative, isn't it? And it makes people dependent, and it's very unattractive. And so Oscar Wilde has a great little essay talking about this and just saying how awful giving is, and really how we shouldn't be generous at all. And some of the postmodern writers have picked up this theme as also. So I really wanted to talk about what healthy giving looks like. And so there's a framework, which is, receiving before you give, giving appropriately, letting go, accepting the gift, giving back, and being transformed. And I've approached that in the second half, again, through 4 or 5 lenses. So I've approached it sociologically, drawing on the sociology of giving and relating it to Jesus Christ. Then I approached it from the point of view of liberation theology, and said liberation theology inputs into those themes, but also is transformed by those themes of giving. And then I've said that one of the priorities of the church is to give to those in priority who are marginalized. If it's in the workplace, it's those people who are being bullied that you might start with. And then there's a chapter in which I pick up the same 5 or 6 themes and relate them to conversations. And there's a whole theological strand, the Protestant strand, that the church is a herald, that the church is proclamation, and that always feels very one-sided. So I come back and say, no, we don't need to have that one-sided approach. Let's talk about the church as God's gift of conversation. The church is God's conversation with the world and the world's conversation with God. If that's what the church is, what happens in conversations? We give to each other. You know, we're all the time giving our contributions and receiving our contributions and giving back. So again, I'm trying to pick up these 6 themes of receiving first, giving appropriately, and so on, and relate them to the literature on good conversations and how can we be a healthy conversational church. And then lastly, I picked the same thing up, set of themes up in relation to the Eucharist, because the Eucharist, Holy Communion, is giving par excellence. So how can we think about Holy Communion in relation to these 6 themes? And how does Holy Communion help us as we think about these 6 themes? So that's just kind of breadth of the church. So what I've been trying to do is to use giving as a way of looking at some of the big themes in recent literature on the church, as well as to think of, you know, how do we make this real in our everyday lives as we try and multiply the church.
That's great. And so you touched on the question that I was going to ask, which was about power and the power dynamics in the process of giving. And so you talked about what Oscar Wilde said about giving. But there is I love the way that you talk about giving. It's not in a manipulative way. It's there's a sort of a mutuality about it, which and a sort of an awareness of when we have an awareness of the power dynamics involved in giving, that the church ends up in a more sort of humble place, a more neutral place with those. And that idea of conversation with rather than imposing upon, I think that's quite powerful within the book, I think.
Yeah, I think we can understand mission as conversation, really. And the theme of receiving first, which occurs all through these chapters, is really important, because if you go in and say, we've got lots to give you, you know, I remember one clergy coming into the chapter meeting and saying, oh, we've arrived as a church, but we're here to bless you all. And everyone else in the chapter was absolutely furious. You know, it felt patronizing. Whereas if we come in our context and say, you know, you've got lots to give to us, help us. Yeah, we've got problems with safeguarding. You guys outside the church, you know how to deal with this. Help us. So if we come with an open heart, ready to receive from the world, then and make ourselves dependent on the world first, then this is much more healthy. And likewise, you know, one of the important aspects of giving is letting go. You know, a gift is not a gift unless you let go. And if you hang on to it, it's not really a gift at all. So letting go involves risk. The gift may be used in ways you didn't expect, and it may surprise you, and you may be disappointed too in how it's used. And that's part of the inevitable pain of giving. I mean, giving is joyful. You know, giving is associated with celebration, isn't it? Christmas and birthdays and things like that. So we don't want to get too heavy about it. There's terrific joy in giving appropriately and seeing your gift welcomed. But there are times when you give a precious gift and it's abused. You know, and the new little congregation you plant perhaps becomes a little bit heretical or doesn't go the direction that you hope. And that's the risk you take. And Jesus took that risk right at the beginning. You know, when, you know, all his disciples were gathered at, you know, Matthew 28, it says that some still doubted, you know, and Jesus' response to the doubt was to say, well, you know, folks, I'm off. Here we go. It's over to you. You take the church forward. So we need to, I think, be prepared to let the gift go. And that's when it becomes healthy giving. And of course, there needs to be return giving as well. And that becomes really healthy. And I was thinking about this today. You know, very often I come across pioneers and so on who, you know, say, oh, you know, the church, the mainstream church, they're not interested in my new community. They don't take it seriously. I want to say, you've got it wrong. Look, your new community needs to take the initiative of giving back to the church. They already received a gift from the main church, which is you and the community you've planted. They need to take the initiative of giving back. And as they take the initiative of giving back to their local congregation, the parent congregation, then the parent congregation will become interested in this new little offspring and begin to welcome it. But as long as you're sitting there saying, oh, they won't come to us, they won't come to us, you're missing the point. Giving is reciprocal. And sociologists talk about giving as building relationships, and it only builds relationships when there's a to and fro of gifts. Well, there's been one gift from the institutional church to the new Christian community. There needs to be a return gift. And as that gift church returns a gift and connects up with the local parent congregation, gives to it in whatever ways are appropriate, then the relationship starts to get established and the to and fro of gifts carries on and you strengthen the relationships. So we need to really understand the mutuality, as you said, the mutuality of giving and its importance. It's both sides giving to each other.
And Mike, this point might be the last question, but just sort of, we talked a little bit about the marginalized and the church as a gift to those that God prioritizes, those on the margins of society. But I wonder if you could talk a bit more, and you've hinted at this a couple of times, about the role or how giving the church is connected with the whole idea of church planting and new Christian communities. I think you unpack that quite nicely in the book, that actually how new Christian communities are part of that gift of offering communal life with Christ.
Yeah, they are the heart of it, really. You know, the other forms of giving are really important, but if we just have a model of people coming to us in our parent congregations, then our generosity is quite limited. Whereas if we go out and say we're going to start a new Christian community with you and among you, you know, we'll get to know you. We'll listen to you. That's part of receiving first, listening to you. We'll find ways to work with you to start an activity of love that you that will really bless you, and that's got to be appropriate to you, but it's also got to be appropriate to us as the givers. You know, I mean, we've got certain gifts, but we don't have other gifts. I mean, if I went out and said I'm going to help you play soccer, that would be completely disastrous. So I can see you smiling. Yeah, you can tell I'm not a soccer player. I mean, I love watching it, but it's different. So I think so the giving has to be appropriate to the giver and to the recipient, and also to the relationship between the two. You know, we don't want to charge in and share Jesus, because that may be more than the relationship can carry at that time. You give what is appropriate to that relationship and the weight that it can bear. So there's appropriate giving, and then you build community as you give, and then you find ways of sharing Jesus, which is a further gift. And of course, at each of these stages, you give and you receive back. So, you know, you give by listening to people. You receive back their advice and their comments and the offers to help. And that becomes a platform for giving an appropriately an activity of love. And you receive back from people their regular attendance, the support for what you're doing. And that becomes a platform for the next gift, which is the gift of community. And you give community and build community with people. And as they respond with deepening relationships, that becomes a platform. They give back with that deepening relationships. That becomes a platform for the next gift, which is a gift of sharing Jesus. And again, as people receive that gift, they'll give back with intelligent questions, excitement and joy as they receive that gift. And that then builds a platform for the next gift, which is the gift of building a worshiping community among those people. And as they worship together and experience the joy of Jesus, then that becomes a platform for the next gift, which is to go out and repeat the process with the friends and contacts that they have and do it in the particular way that works for them. So you see, this little cycle that we talk about, the missional journey, it's propelled by gift and return gift and return gift at every stage. And so what I find really exciting is that if we have a theology for giving away new Christian communities, for fresh expressions, whatever we call them, if we have a theology that's based on generosity, we also have, God given to us, because we've just noticed that this is what people do, we have a methodology that is also based on gift and return gift at every stage of that journey. And so this business of, fresh expressions, it's all about generosity through and through and through and through.
Great, Mike. And I love the way that you weave all of that together in the book, and how, the focus on gift, and it is a metaphor that works in all of those aspects that you've been talking about. And I want to thank you for the book. For those of you that want to purchase a book, you can do that at freshexpressions.org.uk/shop. Come to our shop where there are other books, some of them also by Mike Moynagh there. And I mentioned Godsend at the beginning. You can access the Godsend resource at godsend.cloud, where you can also buy the Godsend book. And want to thank you for being with us, Mike. I really appreciate what you've written here. And whatever time of year people might be watching this, it would make an appropriate gift, I'm sure, the book. So giving the gift to a friend as well as buying it for yourself. We do have other conversations with authors. Look out for the conversation that we have with Ed Olsworth-Peters and Leslie Newton about mixed ecology, and there are others in the pipeline too. So do join us on our Fresh Expressions channel, via our podcast, Mission Shape podcast, and other places, our social channels. We look forward to seeing you there and catching up with you in other ways. Thanks very much, Mike, and bless you all for listening and watching. Take care.